Hi, I'm Topher White, and I work with the Walt Disney Company, and I'm in their technical shared services group. And my job is to make sure that the hundreds and hundreds of websites that are out there as part of the entire Disney portfolio stay up and productive and running 24 hours a day, no matter if there's one person hitting it or a million.
How do you define success?
Success is about choice. Success is having choices. There's nothing says lack of success like saying, I have no choice, I have no options. So for me, success has always been, how do I get to the point where I have choices that I can make, I have options into what I can do, and the freedom to make those choices. That's success for me. And I've been really, really happy with where I've gotten, my ability to make choices about my kids, choices about my family, choices about my career, looking at being stuck in a job that I hated and saying, I don't have to stay here. I'm successful enough that I can make a different choice. And that's been the drive that I've always had, not to achieve any given thing, but to have an open set of options.
Where did your inspiration come from?
I've had a lot of inspirations through my life. Probably one of the biggest was my father, who was the hardest working man I've ever met, I've ever known. And he taught me that what you can't get through raw talent, you can sometimes get part of it just through darn hard work. When I was young, I was really into science, and I kind of had this picture of going into the sciences. And then I started watching the original Star Trek with my brothers, and realized that like Spock was kind of nerdy, and Scotty was like the guy, and kind of completely turned me away from that pure science thing into engineering. And I went, wow, I want to be the guy who's like, there's 8 seconds left before the Enterprise blows up, and I'm going to save the day. So that was a big inspiration. And then kind of looking at some of the great minds, right? There's been great people who have inspired me. I was the kid who had the poster of Einstein up in his room that said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Those were the kinds of icons that I gravitated to. I like to think that, outside of my dad, I think most of my inspirations were more fictional or fictionalized constructs. The image we have of Einstein is really kind of a whitewashed, fictionalized icon that gets presented there. And so what I ended up taking out of that, my inspirations, were these ideas that they represented. And so there weren't a lot of real people, which is sometimes really disappointing, right? That you look back at your life and go, I constructed a set of things out of people who really didn't exist, or didn't exist the way that you thought they did. But then I can kind of step back and say, but it was the ideas. It was the ideals that they represented. That's what inspired me. That's why I latched on to that image or that persona. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying, hey, there are these great ideas, and you can be inspired by them and by that symbol as much as you can by an actual person.
How did you move from idea to something actually succeeding in the market?
This is a little different for me because I've always worked in large companies, and I've always been part of really big projects. My role has always been to take a portion of a project or a portion of a product and get that to realization, to figure out a way to make that thing function, make that thing work. There's really 3 ways that we've kind of gone down that. One is getting a lot of clarity around what it is we're really trying to do. There's been a lot of times where people kind of come in and they've conceptualized the product and they're presenting it to you, and you realize that something's not going to work in the market. But when you dig in and say, what is it, why are you really trying to do that? And you get that answer, you can say, hey, well, actually there's a really different way to approach that we can solve that problem. The second one is looking at systems that you have to interact with, systems in the broadest sense, and saying, as unique as this piece is in and of itself, where it touches other things, how can I make it look like something that already works in there? In one of my roles, the biggest challenge was billing. How do we bill for this service? And so we would always look at how do we provide a really, really unique service, but when it comes to the billing, make it look like something that the billing system already understands how to process and how to deal with. And then the third thing is been lots of contingency planning. Literally sitting down with my team and going through the board on a whiteboard and saying, okay, we're going to do this. What do we do if that doesn't work? And kind of plotting out multiple steps ahead and thinking through all the ways it can fail. Too often I see folks really go for the understanding how stuff's going to work when it all works, and they don't take the time to say, how can this break? And when it does break that way, what are we going to do about it? And it's a lot of energy, a lot of time to be able to do that. But you put that energy in, and you do that planning, and you start to close those holes, and you get something that's successful in the market, because the market will throw things at you that you did not expect. And if you've already thought through all the ways that this can break and have closed those loopholes, know how you're going to handle it when it happens, then when it does throw you those curveballs, you're prepared. Nothing makes a product as unsuccessful as when it suddenly starts to break as you get it out there. And people start using it in different ways, and then it stops working because you really didn't think through that. If people can use it and use it in ways you didn't anticipate and do different things with it, and even when it kind of goes off the rails of what you thought it was going to do, it continues to work, that's when you have a successful.
How did you organize your team?
One of the things that I've always looked for in all the teams that I've worked with is, to use an analogy of baseball or football, not everybody's the same thing. You can't field a baseball team of pitchers, right? You can't have a bunch of quarterbacks out there. And so you've got to understand what are all the components of what you need to do, and then fill the slots with individuals who have strength in those areas. So rather than always looking for the greatest engineer, I might need one really great engineer and one really great problem solver who kind of thinks, really non-linearly, and one person who's just kind of the workhorse who can just plow through routine things. The person who really can anticipate the market or the way people are going to respond to things. Looking for individual talents and then bringing them together. Having a bunch of individual talents together is not necessarily going to work. They have to gel as a team. And sometimes that means making really hard decisions, of looking at somebody and saying, you're absolutely brilliant at what you do, but you're not part of the team. You're not gelling with the team, you're not working with the group, and always, 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 the group has to be the most important thing, because it's through the group that you're achieving the objective, and the objective is what's important. That requires a lot of attention. You can't just put people together and expect they're all going to get along, that they're all going to learn the right ways to rely on one another, that it's just going to happen. And it's through that constant attention to them and kind of a little bit of shaping and adjustment and little nudges here and there, and sometimes pulling people aside and talking to them, that you get them into that organization that's really interdependent and functioning really well.
If you could have, what would you have done differently?
Oh gosh, there are so many things. Looking back, there's so many things I would have done differently. and I think it's part of life, right? Is a little bit of second guessing yourself. Looking backwards is always 20/20 vision. But I think the biggest thing, looking back, is I think I would have really tried to understand my value system a little bit better. I spent a lot of time beating myself up over choices that I made, which were the right choices at the time. They were the right things to do, and I felt like I was betraying my dreams. I was not following my passion. But there were really good reasons that I had to do that. And I let myself really latch on to a lot of guilt about that, a lot of disappointment in myself. And when I really got to looking at it, I realized that all of those choices I had made, I made acting according to my values. I made that choice because there was something more important than that dream at that point in my life. There was somebody who needed me. There was something I had to be for my children, for my father. And that was perfectly okay. As a matter of fact, it was important. It was better that I do that. And I lived with a lot of regret that I really shouldn't have had to live with, because I didn't recognize that I was choosing things for the right reasons, and it was okay to do that.
What makes a great entrepreneur?
A really great entrepreneur recognizes the limits of themselves and where they need to shore up their team. There's things that are inherent to entrepreneurship, to getting out there with a new idea, with a new product, that are talents, they're mindsets that are very, very different than how you continually run a business and to how you manage something into profitability. And just by hiring people who are just like you, you're not going to get there. You've got to recognize what your counterpart is, what that reflection is, and hire folks who are there to complement you, who are there to fill in the missing piece, and respect them for that, and trust them to do what they do. That's the difference between an idea guy and an entrepreneur who has a thriving business.
What role did education have in your success?
I think the really biggest pivot for me, from an educational perspective, was when I went back to school and pursued a master's program. I'd been out in the business world for a little over 10 years. And I went back and started doing an MBA. And what was great about it is it wasn't necessarily about teaching me about things that I didn't know, about concepts I didn't know. I had all of these experiences. It was about giving me a systematic framework to then take those experiences and start slotting them in and understand how they related to one another. I could understand why if you did this, it worked, and I did this and it didn't work, but I didn't understand how it interrelated to each other. And that formal education then gave me that great framework in which to take all of these experiences and put them into something coherent. Instead of just a string of experiences, I now had this really great baseline with which to understand how those pieces connected to one another and use it as a going forward decision piece.
What is the smartest question we didn't ask you in your answer?
What scares you, and how do you think you move past it? What scares me is insecurity. The idea that I might make a misstep scares me terribly. And how do you move past it? For me, it's always been about mitigation. And when I was talking before about how you look at all the ways that something can fail and decide how you're going to deal with it when that happens, that's true of yourself too. When you look at it and saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to pitch this idea, they might say no, or perhaps even scarier, they might say yes, right? What are you going to do? Knowing, being ready, asking yourself those questions and being ready with answers helps you get through the point to be able to say that no matter what happens, I'm prepared. And that's the piece that I I think works both from a product perspective and from a personal perspective.